Well, what a great few chapters, isn't it? God will certainly give his faithful people the promised land. It's wonderful. And I hope you feel euphoric. I hope you're encouraged. And this would be a great way to finish Numbers with these last few chapters that are all so positive. Except there's one little cloud on the horizon. You may have noticed I haven't touched chapter 32 yet. And we need to finish by looking at this little chapter, which is part of this last section. And we need to listen. Now, what happens in these chapters? Well, let me read 32 verse 1. Now the people of Reuben and the people of Gad had a very great number of livestock. And they saw the land of Jazer and the land of Gilead, and behold, the place was a place for livestock. And so they go to Moses and they say, hey, this is pretty good land here, and we've got a lot of cattle. Verse 5, and they said, if we have found favor in your sight, let this land be given to your servants for a possession. Do not take us across the Jordan. The land that they have now from Sihon and Og, it's a pretty good land. And so can we have this one, please? And don't take us across the Jordan. Now, I don't know how you would respond. Moses gets angry. But Moses said to the people of Gad and to the people of Reuben, verse 6, shall your brothers go to the war while you sit here? Why will you discourage the heart of the people of Israel from going over into the land that the Lord has given them? Your fathers did this. He goes back to chapter 14. Last time there were a lot of people on the edge of the promised land, and some of them didn't want to go in. Look what happened. And that's you guys, he says. If you don't go in, well, they won't go in. And, well, verse 14, and behold, you have risen in your father's place, a brood of sinful men, to increase still more the fierce anger of the Lord against Israel. Moses is really angry. You're like chapter 14. This is wrong. You're disobeying. Well, the people, they say, no, it's all right. They offer, oh, look, hey, our families will stay here, but we'll go over, the soldiers, and we'll help them fight. We'll do what we promised. And after everything's conquered, then we'll go back and settle here. Would that be all right? No, Moses agrees to this. He says, all right, that's what you'll do, fine. Then you may settle here. So what should we think of these chapters? How does the writer want us to see it? Now, it sounds positive, and some people think it is positive. They're not doing anything wrong. They're godly still. They're obedient. They still do what they had promised. Yes, Moses got angry, but he got angry in chapter 31, and I don't think that was because the people had sinned. It's got a good result, actually. The promised land is larger now, isn't it? They have a greater territory. Yes, that's true. It seems true. But there's a few things that should make us doubt. Is it really the promised land? They're not going over the Jordan. And they want to stay here. And the promised land was always across the Jordan. So it is disobedient, isn't it? Moses' anger is a lot more than in chapter 31. Comparison with chapter 14? It's not great. In chapter 34, when when God says, okay, this is the land, these are the borders, God hasn't increased the land. This stuff is outside the promised land. That's how the Bible sees it. Of course, in Joshua, they do go over, and Joshua says, oh, that's great, you've done what the Lord commanded. But actually, compare the numbers. There's 40,000 warriors there. If you take these tribes, in chapter 26, we're talking 80,000 people. So half the people didn't actually keep their promise. In a way, it's a stupid land as well. The Jordan is a good boundary. It means that you're safer from enemies. These guys were the first to go into exile. Even in the chapter, there's a few more hints, isn't it? How often is God mentioned? Not by the people mention God, but The narrator never mentions God. God doesn't speak or direct. There isn't any word from the Lord like, and the daughters of Zelophehad are right, like in the other chapters. There God kind of gives his approval. Here there's no approval from God. And the language is very interesting. It said they saw the land, that it was good for livestock. And seeing, that's wrong often. Think of Eve. Yeah, she was in the Garden of Eden. She had God's word. She had the serpent's word. And she saw that the fruit was kind of good for food and tasty and could make her wise. She saw. Abraham and Lot, they get to the promised land. Well, what shall they choose? Lot sees that he outside the promised land, Sodom and Gomorrah, looks a lot better. So he settles there. Sodom and Gomorrah, not a good idea, isn't it? So again, seeing isn't great. They guys are judging by sight, not by faith. That is, I think, what's going on here. And these chapters, they aren't positive. It is unbelief deep down. And Moses doesn't force them to go in. If they want to stay out, it's their choice. And so, yeah, they are excluded, I think, from the promised land, but by their own decision. But that's what I think this is. They're not not a positive chapter. These tribes deep down reject the promised land. So what should we think of these chapters? They're a final warning to us. A final warning. In the midst of these wonderful chapters, there's some people who still have no faith. It looks respectable. It's not grumbling. It's not idolatry. It's not rebellion. It sounds reasonable. It sounds pious. And yet, deep down, there's still some unbelief, isn't it? And these people end up not choosing the promised land, choosing to stay out. It's a way of saying, don't presume. And this is such a great generation. It's so positive. But, we have individual responsibility. We can't just go along with the crowd. No, do we each have faith? And these guys are so close, and yet they decide to stay out. Don't let it be you. You may be part of a great church with good teaching, lots of ministry. Doesn't make you a Christian. You might still decide to opt out. Hey, don't presume. Who are you going to be? Who are you? Do you have faith yourself or not? This unbelief can be very deceptive. Like I said, it sounds pious. It can throw people off. It's just little decisions that seem innocent. But ultimately you're choosing this world, isn't it? Ultimately you're not believing. Or you're not doing anything you can to get the promise. Like what they do here, they distance themselves from God's people, ultimately, right? Maybe it's moving to a house far away from church, because it's actually quite nice. Maybe it's a new job, new activities that make you less involved. Little things, innocent things, things that aren't wrong by themselves, and yet they're moving away from the promise. No, rather we should be, and that's how it ends, be like the daughters of Zelophehad. Be like them. They had their eyes fixed firmly on the inheritance. They did anything they could, even if it cost them, to make sure they got there. It's a contrast, isn't it? Who are you going to be? Like the daughters or like these tribes? You're going to take the easy way or the hard way? It's great. God will certainly get his faithful people to the promised land. Are you one of them?